Okay. It looks like everything's been fixed. Thank you very much for bearing with us. So we're going to be starting our Bahaginan Research Forum already. So magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Welcome po sa ating Bahaginan Research Forum. So this Bahaginan Research Forum can also be streamed live on the UP College of Arts and Letters Facebook page and at our YouTube page at bit.ly/YouTubeKal, K-A-L. So Bahaginan is presented by the UP Diliman College of Arts and Letters, UPD Department of European Languages, and UP Diliman Office for Initiatives in Culture and the Arts. So today's topic, before we start our talk, where I would like to call on our Assistant Chairperson at the Department of European Languages to give the welcoming remarks, the opening remarks. Let's all welcome Associate Professor Ana Sibayan Sarmiento.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of our chair, the Department of European Languages Chair, Ma'am Nina Akawili, I would like to welcome you all to this afternoon's Bahaginan by our dear colleagues Miguel Blázquez and Jillian Melchor. I personally find it fascinating how the Zamboangueños found a way to turn tables around and elevate the prestige of their local language. We have much to learn from them and from this research. I think prestige plays a very important role in language preservation, not only among us academics, but more so among parents who choose to decide which languages to use in raising their children. So by studying what the Zamboangueños did, Miguel and Jillian laid down a framework that may serve other Philippine languages. Thank you for agreeing to share your work today, Miguel and Jillian. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that very insightful welcoming remarks. I too am a parent, and yes, language choice is really an important decision in parenting. So let us continue with our program. So as Anna has said, today's topic is about the postcoloniality of Creole language heritage, preserving and promoting Zamboanga Chavacano. Our speakers are Dr. Miguel Blázquez-Carretero and Ms. Jillian Melchor. So questions will be addressed after their presentation. Zoom participants, you may post your questions on the chat, while viewers in Facebook and on YouTube may post theirs as comments. Link to the evaluation form will be posted at the end of the program. So please answer the evaluation form to receive your e-certificate of attendance. So let me introduce now our speakers. First, let me introduce Dr. Miguel Blázquez-Carretero. He is an associate professorial fellow and the Spanish section coordinator of the Department of European Languages at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He earned his doctorate degree in Spanish philology and literature at the UNED in Spain. And after having completed an MSc in Applied Linguistics and Second Language Acquisition at the University of Oxford in the UK. He is the author of several articles in the field of linguistics, published in internationally renowned journals such as Language Learning and Technology, Applied Linguistics, or Recall. Our second speaker is Ms. Jillian Louise Melchor. She is a faculty member of the Division of Humanities of the University of the Philippines, Visayas, where she teaches Spanish, literary translation, and cultural studies. She earned her Erasmus Mundus Master's degree in Multilingual Cultural Studies from the University of Sheffield, the University of Bergamo, and the University of Santiago de Compostela. She is a published literary translator and has academic publications in the field of language education policy and post-colonial linguistics. Let's all welcome Dr. Miguel Blázquez-Carretero and Ms. Jillian Louise Melchor.
Thank you very much. May I share my screen, please?
Yes, of course. I'm just trying to do it right
Sorry.
now. Okay. Can someone help me do that? Yeah. Now I think you can share already. Okay. Okay. Great. You have the floor.
Are we audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, okay. Magandang hapon sa lahat at maraming salamat sa pagkakataong ibahagi ang aming saliksik. And it's called The Postcoloniality of Creole Language Heritage, Preserving and Promoting 𝐶𝐬𝐭𝐲𝐿. So despite the centrality of language in the colonial project, studies examining power have not given much weight to communication as a precondition for the establishment and maintenance of colonial regimes. Postcolonial linguistics redresses this gap by providing a historical and political investigation of non-traditional forms of power, such as language. Nowhere then is the role of language in the exercise of power more visible than in the emergence of bridge languages, since they exemplify how language was at once a tool and a product of colonialism. But what exactly are bridge languages? Also known as vehicular tongues, Creoles and Pidgins are new language varieties that emerge from sustained contact between European colonizers and colonized natives, who necessitated a bridge language in order to communicate. With 3 centuries under Spanish rule, the Philippines was not exempt from language shift brought about by these intercultural and interlinguistic encounters.
Chavacano is the only documented Spanish Creole in Asia, and is the umbrella term for the Creoles spoken in various parts of the Philippines. The principal varieties of this Creole are spoken in Cavite, Ternate, and Zamboanga. There are also documented Chavacano dialects in the Manila Bay area, Cotabato, and Davao, although these varieties are either endangered or altogether extinct. This is not surprising, considering that most of the world's Creoles and Pidgins are particularly endangered, as they are being replaced by dominant languages. For instance, Chavacano is losing ground to Filipino Wiccan Pambansa and English as a global language. Nonetheless, not all the varieties of Chavacano suffer the same fate. Whilst the usage of Caviteño and Ternateño is steadily declining, Zamboanga City is home to around 500,000 native speakers of Zamboangueño. Simply put, Zamboanga Chavacano is the healthiest variety to date, even earning the status as the largest Iberian Creole in Asia.
So just as language remains an under-examined feature of colonial configurations, so are socio-political issues inadequately addressed and analyzed in the field of Chavacano studies. Indeed, research on the Philippine Chavacano Creoles has largely privileged empirical linguistic queries, such as defining the variant's characteristics or tracing the different variants' genealogy. There is thus much left to be investigated if we shift the plane of discourse away from the Creole towards the Creole-speaking communities and their respective histories. How has Zamboanga Chavacano so far avoided the threat of endangerment and even managed to flourish? We seek to answer this question by investigating the social rather than genealogical trajectory of this Chavacano variety, from colonial to modern times. First, we review the documentation of Chavacano in colonialist literature, such as in travel accounts, chronicles, in ethnographic reports. Here we will highlight the pejorative treatment of Creoles, mostly European observers who describe these non-standard language varieties as linguistic anomalies, that is, as innately inferior to their European standard counterparts. Second, we will juxtapose the colonial era marginality of Chavacano against the ascent to socio-political power of the Chavacano-speaking Christian Zamboangueño. Here we draw not just from historical accounts produced in the colonial era, but also contemporary cultural material written and produced by members of the Zamboangueño elite to gain an understanding of how they construct the city's heritage through ethnic notions of Hispanidad. We provide an overview of how the discourse of cultural and ethnic heritage is embodied in the political landscape of modern-day Zamboanga City. We seek to demonstrate how the elite's articulation of their Hispanic identity translates into institutional initiatives that revitalize the Creole and eventually increase its social prestige.
The term Chabacano was not originally coined to describe the corrupt variant of Castilian spoken in various parts of the Philippine colony. Its first ever documented usage was in 1554 in the book Recopilación en Metro by Spanish writer Sánchez de Badajoz. He used the term as a noun referring to a cheap and poor quality knife. Over time, the term generated a qualifier to describe anything vulgar or substandard. As a lexical entry, Chabacano first appeared in the Diccionario de Autoridades de la Real Academia Española de la Lengua in 1729, defining it as something executed in an unpolished manner without corresponding mastery, and therefore anything unworthy of praise or recognition. We can thus presume that the word has been appropriated in the colonial era to refer an underdeveloped version of a standard Castilian, characterized by incorrect appearance, vulgar use, and so-called deviating features. Some of the depreciative labels attached to the Creole are
Verdorben Spanish or depraved Spanish. It has also been called unintelligible Spanish.
Also algarabía or hulabaloo, jerigonza, gibberish, español de tienda, hawker Spanish, or español de cocina, kitchen Spanish.
But there is nothing surprising in the treatment of Chabacano as a degenerate variety of the colonial language, not because it was a common trend in colonialist writing, but because of the underlying ideological assertions of colonial knowledge production. The scholarly trend of Creole exceptionalism reinforced notions of inferiority ascribed to the non-European speakers of the Creoles themselves. For instance, this is how various observers documented the Chabacano spoken in Zamboanga. Nieto Aguilar commented that the people of Zamboanga mixed Moro Tagalo and Spanish, a language that all of them speak, albeit corruptly. Lay observed that among the inhabitants of Zamboanga, a corrupt Spanish has established itself, consisting of Spanish and native words mixed up in various combinations by different individuals. This positionality is even more explicit in the attribution of nobility to the colonial standard, portraying it as an inherently superior language. As Retana put it, vocabulary derived from Spanish has a more noble structure and a more pleasant flavor compared to that derived from Filipino.
The marginal treatment of Chabacano in colonialist writing is in contrast with the pride that present Zamboanga City demonstrates for their mother tongue. Indeed, it is impossible to hear Zamboangueño heritage without reference to Chabacano. Since a Creole is inferior to its corresponding standard language only in social status, it is interesting to investigate the case of Zamboanga Chabacano, which enjoys utmost social prestige in a multilingual territory. Studying heritage publications such as vignettes, essays, history books, newspaper clippings, and patrimonial texts, we witness how Chabacano's prestige is intimately tied with the Zamboangueños' perceived Hispanic identity. These notions of Hispanidad emerge from and are constructed through discourses of place belonging, identity alignment, mestizaje, and linguistic citizenship.
The pre-colonial Zamboanga Peninsula was peopled by various ethno-linguistic groups, among whom were the Subanon, who are believed to be the peninsula's oldest settlers, the Samal Moro, an Islamic ethnic group who speak a Malayo-Polynesian language, and the nomadic Sama de Laot, other known as the Bajau. Other ethnic groups from neighboring islands settled in Zamboanga due to its connectivity to the maritime trade network in the region. There were also settlements of Tausug, the politically dominant ethnic group in the Sulu archipelago, as well as farming communities of Yakan, the Moros of Basilan Island. Missing from this plural society were the lowland Christianized Filipinos, who already in the 17th century represented the majority of the Philippine cultural demographic makeup. Indeed, Zamboangueño as an ethno-linguistic designation would only emerge in the 18th century, well after the Spaniards had built a fortress to ward off hostilities from the pirate-swarmed seas and from adjacent Moro-dominated islands. The military fort was originally called Real Fuerza de San Jose and subsequently named Fort Pilar during reconstruction following the arrival of the Blessed Virgin of Pilar. During Spanish occupation of the Zamboanga Peninsula, the colonizers encouraged local inhabitants to establish settlements around the fort. This gave birth to the Christianized ethnic group that would come to be known as the Zamboangueño. In this Zamboanga City Ordinance, we see how local politicians trace the founding of Zamboanga City to the building of the Spanish military fortress, whereas the official laying of the cornerstone of La Real Fuerza de San Jose in Cagangang, Rio Hondo, took place on the 23rd day of June, 1635. In order to remind all Zamboangueños of the glorious past, do hereby declare June 23 as Dia de Zamboanga. The Christian settlements around the fort received preferential treatment from the colonial authorities. They were exempted from taxes, and some were even assigned administrative posts. The unequal esteem and power accorded to the Zamboangueño ethnic segment vis-a-vis other colonial subjects produced a system of social stratification among the colonized subjects, which would then be perpetuated in post-colonial Zamboanga City. Even Spanish observers such as Corte Ruano took note of this distinction, stating that the Zamboanga people are superior because they are highly mixed with Spanish blood and have been raised in the shadow of that military establishment, to the point of not knowing any language other than Spanish and consider themselves as Spaniards. They are exempt from tribute and received other privileges to which they have always responded with acts of loyalty and courage. In this study, we pay special attention to how the identity of the colonial subject is constructed, not just in relation to the colonial master, but also to his fellow colonial subjects. We can think of it as the native self versus the native others. This approach provides a more nuanced understanding of settings characterized by ethnic plurality, which would have prevented a monolithic colonial reality, such as in the Philippine archipelago. A close look at contemporary heritage materials reveals a double movement in the way that the Zamboangueño ancestors constructed the native self and how they aligned their identity in the multi-ethnic polity. On one hand, this native self would not have existed without the colonizer, whom they perceived as instrumental to how this self came into being. Yet this native self was also constructed in relation to the native others, including the non-Christian indigenes, such as the Moros, which represented the extreme other, and the lowland Christian Filipino groups, with whom likeness couldn't be established yet nonetheless remained another. As demonstrated by Limi Atilano in his 1993 vignette, the romantic spirit of the Hidalgo conquistador went deepest in the soul of the Zamboangueños, and from this exuded that fastidious allergy towards the hoe and the broom, tasks relegated to menials from the boondocks. Here, the native self is constructed by establishing likeness with the colonizer, who had supposedly left traces of our conqueror's nobility in his spirit. Yet the process of identity alignment does not end here. The native self becomes a complete subject when juxtaposed against the native others, who comprise the menials from the boondocks. That is, those who are culturally, politically, and socially dissociated from Spain, or simply put, those who have yet to be civilized. If the Zamboangueño identity is marked by its Hispanidad, what then differentiates it from other mestizos in the Philippines? In other words, what lends distinction to Zamboangueño mestizaje? Hints can be found in both historical accounts and in contemporary heritage publications. Some argue that despite Manila's political value to the colonial government, its Hispanidad was diffused into a much wider space and was thus marginal compared to that of Zamboangas. As observed by 𝐙𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐵𝐻 in 1880, the Zamboangueño race is Spanish for its sensibility and has the most standard features and the most pale color that is known in the Philippines. This is echoed by Orendain II in his book published in 1984 entitled Zamboanga Hermosa, Memories of an Old Town, where he says, no other group of Filipinos can be said to have been more Hispanized than the Zamboangueños with their picturesque Chavacano. A significant facet of Zamboangueño miscegenation is the emergence of an indigenous nobility who, as earlier mentioned, enjoyed material and social privileges from the colonial authorities. Certain ethnic groups, most notably the Christianized Subanon and Lutao, participated in Spanish military expeditions. From these active collaborators arose prominent figures who had double ties with the Spaniards and the local aristocracy. Indeed, families which trace their ancestry to Spaniards have become household names in present-day Zamboanga City, as they have dominated its political life long after the Spanish authorities had receded.
Central to the Zamboangueño Hispanidad is the enduring colonial legacy literally articulated through their Spanish-based mother tongue. Since their Creole mother tongue is essential in shaping their uniqueness from the rest of the country, it comes at no surprise that Zamboanga city elites wield their power to institutionalize Chavacano's usage, thereby securing its preservation and promotion. Here we have a top local executive that said in the Manila Times that here in Zamboanga, we are strongly promoting unity by enjoining non-natives who have permanently settled in our highly urbanized city to ultimately be known as Zamboangueños, who are articulate in Chavacano. He even said, Chavacano is a reflection of our culture and a real testimony to our heritage and our link to the glorious past. It is too priceless a legacy to relinquish and be forgotten. It is what set us apart from the rest of the country. In fact, to prevent the potential endangerment of Zamboanga Chavacano through rapid urbanization and settled migration, Zamboangueño institutions and individuals exert effort to reinforce language use and visibility in all possible domains of civic life. For example, in politics, the politically motivated predilection for Chavacano incentivizes the crafting of local policies towards language revitalization. For example, Ordinance number 374 was emanated, declaring June 23rd as the annual date of Día de Fundación de Chavacano, to commemorate the laying of the cornerstone of the Real Fuerza de San Jose in 1635. The decree allocates a yearly budget of 150,000 pesos to defray the expenses of activities and ceremonies in honor of the city's foundation. The Hispanophilia of Zamboanga city elites, who have idealized Zamboangueño in the image of all things Spanish, is reflected in other political initiatives, such as the rebranding of Zamboanga as Asia Latin City. As part of this project, Philippine Airlines was asked to support the initiative by playing Chavacano songs aboard their crafts and incorporating Chavacano greetings in their spills. Another significant aspect of this urban development plan was to bring the call center industry to Zamboanga on the premise that Chavacano speakers could easily be trained to communicate in Spanish.
Education is also an important facet of language revitalization, as we will see here. It must be recalled that during President Corazon Aquino's administration, the Zamboanga congresswoman at the time, Maria Clara Lobregat, also from a political dynasty, led a multi-partisan group of legislators from outside the political center, opposing the presidential decree to impose Tagalog as the nationwide medium of instruction. Nowadays, Chavacano is among the 19 regional languages adopted as a medium of instruction and learning area under the mother tongue-based multilingual education program of the Department of Education. In support of the multilingual education framework, several materials have been produced both by the DepEd, such as Edukasyon sa Pagpapakatao, Kagamitan ng Mag-aaral ng Chavacano, and by the local governments alike. Despite the absence of courses that teach Chavacano as a foreign language, the Zamboangueño government is exerting tremendous effort to promote its study by funding the creation of materials such as monolingual and bilingual dictionaries, Chavacano history books, scholastic textbooks, as well as the translation into Chavacano of literary texts. Equally important is the initiative of Chavacano scholars to promote Zamboanga Chavacano as the basis for the standardization of all Philippine Chavacano Creoles.
Media presence is another factor that proves increasingly vital to the preservation and promotion of a given language. In Zamboanga, the Mindanaoan regional newspaper, Brigada, is written in Chavacano. Columns featured in Zamboanga Today are also written in the Creole. Zamboangueño broadcast media is also active in its use of the Creole. The city has TV and radio stations such as Patrol Chavacano that are fully transmitted in Zamboangueño. Let's see a video of this.
Noticias. Student admissions ulit. Positivo caso de COVID-19 na ciudad de Zamboanga y alcanzarían a 5. Oficial de San José Consulta propone para hacer two-way con el maliwasan seaside, siendo plano de ir a declarar lockdown at ila barangay. Los senior citizen y despedimiento hasta esta bajo la porada medical na Zamboanga City Medical Center. Pescador de recodo ya despedí también después de calentura y experiencia dolor de cuerpo. Persona herido después con el lanza a sus vecinos a mediante de la discusión acerca de la lista de los beneficiarios y sabe qué modo puede evitar a los frontliners y le va a volver con el virus na familia.
Chavacano also enjoys a considerable online presence. There are several Facebook pages that revolve around this Creole. In September 2019, Wikipedia in Zamboangueño was ranked 231st globally by the total number of articles written in the language. Several videos in Zamboanga Chavacano are also uploaded to YouTube, spanning a variety of genres and enjoying several thousands of views. Here, for example, you have the Wikipedia in Chavacano. You can find so many articles written in this language, as well as YouTube videos of how to learn their language, commenting, news, or even just blogs. And wait, sorry about this. Just a second. Why is this happening? Zamboangueño is not completely left out in local cinema. It is not only witnessed in the Cine Chavacano Film Festival, but also through the participation of Chavacano language movies in nationwide film fest. While a film is not yet to be realized, several short films in Chavacano have been already screened. Here you have also a video of the
Film festival.
film festival
Ya principia el pre-public screening del Zamboanga Hermosa Film Festival del Octubre 4 na Centro Latino Theater Room. Más o menos 20 films el participan na film festival, que tiene dos categoría amo el animated y live action films. Esta actividad es una manera donde puede man showcase el mga talento del zamboangueños na filmmaking. Y gusta también el mga estudyante con el mga film sila ya puede mira dentro del 2 horas.
Actually, I enjoy Mali. Maski hindi tayong mga kasi hindi pero enjoy le.
It's a very nice movie and you can see the culture and the tradition of the Zamboangueños.
El free public screening del mga local films ay hasta Octubre 7. Tiene sila 3 batch del screening principiando a las 10 de aga, a la 1 y a las 4. Desde aquí na Centro Latino para na 𝐶havacano Film Festival, Mayra Espinosa y 105.9 y Media Mo FM. Thank you.
The local music scene is equally vibrant. There are many up-and-coming Zamboangueño bands and singers featured on YouTube, whose songs have hundreds of thousands of engagement. The song ¿Por qué? Of Zamboanga-based band Maldita figured among the Philippines' greatest hits in 2011. Let's listen to it.
Oh, the first day that we signed up for Monday.com, our department was already able to connect our
Solo Teta puede gira la cabeza, el dolor yo ya sentí. Porque pa' contigo yo ya querer. ¿Cómo voy porque sa'yo tapi di kita ¡𝐿𝐴𝐿 nadie llores vivió era un vida contigo.
All of these initiatives illustrate that the Zamboangueño desire to promote 𝐶havacano is not merely articulated discursively. The vitality of the Creole is ensured by concrete steps on the part of institutions and individuals alike to strengthen the language visibility in all domains of civic life, such as education, religion, politics, economy, literature, pop culture, and in various other forms of media. The study of Creoles cannot be dissociated from colonial discourse, since bridge languages result from cross-cultural encounters, often having emerged in colonial territories predicated on exogenous domination. Early documentation on the existence and emergence of hybrid tongues was likewise premised on the ideological dichotomy of civilized and civilized. Close scrutiny of colonial-era commentaries on 𝐶havacano betrays an underlying perception of anomaly that is extended to the Creolophones themselves. Yet among the Philippine 𝐶havacano Creoles, one variety has obtained unparalleled social prestige. When most Creolophones were consigned to linguistic exile in the wake of decolonization, the 𝐶havacano-speaking Christians of ethnically plural Zamboanga City rose to social and political dominance. Not only has this new elite held steadfastly to their Creole mother tongue, their pride in having inherited a Hispanic language subverts the ideological marginality of Creoles in colonialist writing. What 𝐵𝐶𝐬𝐭𝐜𝐺𝐸 illustrates is the social trajectory of a contact language from being documented as an impoverished variant of a colonial standard, as Español de Cocina or kitchen Spanish, to being utilized as a resource for ethnic identity construction and as a vehicle for social prestige, such as un poquito español. This intriguing case represents a singular example of the subversive agency of a Creolophone community. Nevertheless, we must be wary of painting too optimistic a picture. Hyperurbanization and transformative globalization are realities the 21st century Zamboangueños grapple with. By drawing perspectives from post-colonial thought, specifically from post-colonial linguistics, which foregrounds the agentive role of place in discourses of ethnicity and heritage, we hope to have illustrated how ethnic subjectivation is glaringly inscribed within the framework of language preservation. So thank you very much for having listened to our presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blázquez and Ms. Melchor. It's a very, very interesting presentation, a very interesting research. Some of our participants are clapping their hands here on Zoom. We're now formally opening the Q&A part of our Bahaginan. Please feel free to raise your hands for our Zoom participants if you have questions. You can also post them on our chat if you have questions. For those who are on Facebook and on YouTube, you may also post your questions there as comments, and we will be receiving them here on Zoom and posing them to our presenters. So again, while waiting, it's very good that the internet there in our office has functioned well. And it's also very interesting how Chabacano is flourishing. The song that you played earlier, I've heard that song a lot, and how it evolved is very from its roots in the Spanish era, Spanish colonization, until now it became the language of even the elite, right? So it's very interesting how that trajectory played out. Ayan, well, any questions po from our audience? I'm thinking of a question. Siguro me, how are you? I'll start with the questions, maybe to get the questions flowing, no? So how did you choose this? It's the research is very interesting, but I'm just curious, no? How did you come about this with this as a research topic?
Oh, at the time I was actually enrolled in the Asian Center here in UP Diliman. I was doing my master's in Philippine Studies, and we had a course on Philippine languages and cultures. And so we were tasked to pick a language, any language, in any Philippine language, and then to conduct research about it. And I thought that coming from the Department of European Languages, at the time I was still teaching in Del, I thought it would be interesting to have a look at a Spanish lexified Philippine language. So that is the Chabacano Creole. And so it started as a modest essay then, because I gathered all of the Chabacano heritage materials that we had in the main library in the Filipiniana section. And I noticed straight away that most of them were Zamboanga publications. Knowing that there are other variants of Chabacano, it struck me as interesting why it seemed to me that at least given the materials that I had at hand, the Zamboangueño seemed to be the most active in the or merely as articulating Chavacano as part of their ethnic heritage, right? So and then I talked about the research with Dr. Blázquez. At the time I didn't read Spanish yet, so he helped me to comb through the Spanish language archives in the colonial era, to contrast that with the contemporary publications that I found in the main library. And there's where we saw a sharp contrast, and we thought that from the point of view of social prestige, it's interesting to see just how marginal and inferior the Chavacano Creole was documented by European observers, and how that was completely subverted in contemporary publication. And that's how the study came about.
Very interesting, Genesis, and I appreciate the very detailed answer. No, that we have here, and the questions are now coming in. Yay! So we have questions here on Zoom. Wait, let me just say, we received also a comment from YouTube saying that as a Chavacano, I really love the presentation from 𝗕𝗔𝗛𝗛𝗛𝗛𝗛𝗛𝗛𝗔. Thank you very much for that comment. Now let's proceed to the questions we have received here on Zoom, on the Q&A portion. First question, this is from Riley Bautista. He or she has 3 questions. The first one, what are the plans of the Zamboanga City LGU to continue teaching Chavacano in the schools, given that there are plans to remove MTBMLE? And then you want me to go through all the 3 questions, or just one by one? One by one.
Okay.
One by one. Okay.
This is actually a very interesting question, because we asked that ourselves as soon as we saw the news about the proposed removal of the mother tongue based framework from our basic education program. We began this paper in writing this paper in 2019 through 2020. It went under several revisions. Let's say that, our data and the gathering of the materials took place primarily in 2020, and at the time there were no concerns yet or talk of removing the mother tongue based multilingual education program. If anything, I believe the position of the LGU at the time was to keep on financing or funding the production of didactic materials in Chavacano to augment the initiative. And then our paper got published, when was it? Last year, right?
Yeah.
Last year. So that's before the proposed removal. So actually, we firmly believe that this needs updating in light of this plan, this proposed policy to remove the mother tongue framework. It will be interesting to see how the local government would react to that. What we do know is that, as you know in the presentation as well, present-day Zamboanga City remains ethnically plural, and there are there's a lot of internal migration coming on. So there are many languages present in Zamboanga City. There is Cebuano, there are other regional languages. There's, of course, the Wikang Pambansa. There's English as a global language. And so all of these languages remain, to put it quite bluntly, in competition with each other. And this explains the news clipping that we included in our presentation about a top executive asserting that knowledge of Chavacano is somewhat of a social requirement to be a resident of Zamboanga City. And so internal migrants are actually enjoined, if not encouraged or obliged to learn Chavacano in schools.
Also, really good question, as my colleague commented. Well, I work hand to hand with the 𝐷PED in their SPFL program. So actually, I was revising their curriculum after the new law was passed in January 2023. And well, as far as I know, they are still looking at it. There is still debate about it. And apparently they are going to abandon the study of these languages as a subject.
As a learning area, but probably not as a medium of instruction.
Exactly, but it's going to keep being as a medium of instruction until grade 3. So obviously, Chavacano politicians, I believe, no, as far as we know, they are going to continue with their plans of developing materials and having their teachers teaching Chavacano there. Actually, I think it links to the second question, right?
Yes, okay.
Sorry.
I'll just read the second question before you go to that. So the second question is, what are the current efforts in intellectualization of Chavacano?
Yeah, in fact, as I said, well, Zamboanga is the intellectuality there, politicians, all the community in general. But well, now that we are talking about intellectualization, no? They are making great efforts. Everything started in 2011. They had a conference. They have a conference where not just people from Zamboanga, but people also from Ternate, Cavite, and from Chavacano communities all gathered there in Zamboanga. And it was there, for example, where it was decided that the Chavacano will have an orthography, that actually there is already a book about that they are going to fix the orthography and the spelling, because one of the ways to somehow protect a language is to standardize their use. The very moment that you say, well, this is how you should use the language and this is how it should be written, is a way to protect an endangered language. So this is one of the things that they do, and in that conference, they, for example, agree that they will use an etymological framework, that, for example, when choosing how the orthography of a language is going to be, you can go either from a more phonetic approach, like, for example, that can be the Spanish one, where you have direct correspondence between phoneme and grapheme, or you can actually choose a more etymological one that, for example, it can be French, that, for example, you have words like maintenant that actually is written maintenance, if you go letter by letter. So, but it's because the root comes from previous Old French and Latin, if we go backwards.
English, to a certain extent,
Exactly.
also follows an etymological approach in its orthography.
So, for example, in that conference in 2011 is where they somehow trace a way forward, a route of what to do. And they have already developed also a dictionary. They have already developed the orthography. There is even a spell checker that was built together with a university in Spain. So they are translating books, like, for example, Little Print. So actually, there is a constant, there are initiatives.
Yeah.
No?
It begins as an act of codification, right?
Exactly.
You codify the spoken language, and that leads to standardization, and that leads to issues of preservation, because that the codification of the Creole allows further efforts.
Another debate is what the communities of Cavite or Ternate think about the prominent way of standardizing Chavacano is taking Zamboangueño as
So in a way, without getting much into it, because it's a separate study altogether, but let's say that given that 𝐵𝐸𝐴𝐻𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐵𝐴𝐻 is the healthiest variety, and that the community is also the most active so far in the promotion and preservation of the Chavacano language, it also is emerging as a dominant variant with respect to other Chavacano variants. So in this conference, for example, right, Zamboanga Chavacano would have been established as the basis for the standardization of the Philippine Chavacano Creoles, including the other varieties.
Yeah, that's also in relation to a comment from Riley Bautista that he likes the presentation, and he or she is from Cavite City, and knowing what Zamboanga City did right will help a few of us in revitalizing Chavacano here, so in Cavite too. So let's go to the last question from Riley Bautista, which is how long did it take Zamboanga City LGU to produce the materials for studying Chavacano in schools? Do you have the data for this one? For
They
this question?
have been producing these materials since 2011, and it has been
2011.
both the 𝐷PED working on the textbooks that the students will do this in the school, but also the university and well, societies for the revitalization of the Chavacano there, who are actually working in other books, like, for example, the translation of the Little Prince. For example, the dictionaries were an endeavor of the city. It was the council of the city who actually asked the university and the people who was there in that conference to actually put in place that dictionary and orthography of Chavacano. So yeah, it's in motion. I don't know exactly how long does it takes. I guess to translate the Little Prince, it takes shorter than, for example, building a whole dictionary, but I know that they have been constantly working on it since 2011.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dr. Blázquez. We would like to call on Dr. Sales. He's been raising his hand. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. Congratulations on a very wonderful presentation, Miguel and Jillian. It's always heartening to listen to colleagues doing excellent work on research, particularly like trying to establish these synergies between our main body of research, which is European languages, and then somehow like juxtaposing that research to more local concerns such as Chavacano. It's also quite encouraging to like listen to more like current studies on the Chavacano language, because like and it's probably a defect on my part, like most of the studies we have in the department were like written by Luigi Romaniños, former faculty member, and then I know you know Mauro Fernandez, of course, who's written a lot about the language, and they've always approached Chavacano somehow like through a historical lens. So it's always refreshing to see like more current concerns reflected in the discussion. So I actually have a question, probably two, that depending on how well I will be able to extemporaneously develop the second one. But the first one is probably, and Miguel, I think you've already talked about this a bit, but I wonder if you could address, for example, and I think Jillian can also address this. How do you view, for example, your role as an academic working primarily in teaching Spanish as a foreign language vis-a-vis this research on Chavacano? So how, like, what sort of relationships can you establish between your efforts of researching how to teach Spanish in the Philippines and the role of Chavacano in education in our public education system? Do you see these two things as opposing? Do you see them as complementary? How does your work, for example, inform in 𝐿𝐴, in Español Lengua Extranjera, actually inform the research to to make the survival of Chavacano more plausible in the near future? That's number one. And number two, and this is me trying to shut up immediately. I've had students before who are Chavacano, who are trying to learn Spanish, and would always have this self-deprecating view of their own language, saying that it is corrupted Spanish. It is like a bad dialect of Spanish, etc. I wonder if you are able to get any data on this regarding how this view is perpetuated, perhaps in the way Chavacano is taught, in the way that Chavacano is studied. Is this a mere mimicry of opinions coming from the Spanish era, or is there somehow some influence coming from local sources about a self-critical view of their own language? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlon. Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. Me as a Spanish professor, well, I'm just going to talk a bit. I'm going to talk about Chavacano and Spanish, but this, to be honest, is not specific to any of those languages. And for example, later on, I'm going to give word to Jillian, because for sure she's able to answer this question much better than me. But well, this is my field of research, applied linguistics, and how do we learn languages? And there's a huge debate, in the scholar community and the educative community of how many languages should we introduce in the schools, when, how should we be teaching content courses in a different language? What do we do in multilingual classroom? And imagine it's not the same in Spain or where I'm from. I'm going to say Spain, but it's not true, because, for example, in Catalonia, they also teach Catalan at the same time. For example, in my region, we just learn Spanish, and then we have a second language that is English, and that's it. But claro, obviously, here in the Philippines, where you have two official languages, English and Filipino, and apart from that, you have regional languages. That's why I'm going to give floor to Jillian, because she's also a speaker of Ilocano. And on top of that, you have the foreign languages. Like if you want to study in high school, you have this program that you also can study, choose as an elective, pues Spanish or Italian or Chinese. So finally, we are asking our students to learn 3-4 languages at the time. And how do we do so? We really know that the brain is totally capable to do so. Maybe the way to approach it is differently, and maybe that's why a more multilingual approach is necessary. There are people now talking about translanguaging, the way, if you are in a community where there are different languages, was how to approach learning languages in that communities. So I guess for my part, there is nothing at all that says like, well, the very moment that you are teaching Spanish, you should not teach Chavacano, or you also do, in my point of view, you don't have to see languages as mere objectives to get a job or whatever. That is also a way of thinking, especially by politicians, like why we should learn local languages where we can just teach English that is much more useful. Well, that can be another debate, but as I say, I'm gonna let Jillian, because she's protagonist, she know what I'm talking about.
Well, my answer to, thank you for the questions, Marlon. I find them very interesting. And my answer to the first comes from a rather personal rather than academic place. And this is something that I noticed when I began teaching in UP Visayas. they are somehow more aware of than I think of the existence of Chavacano, also because there has been migration in Iloilo from Zamboanga. And so I although I have not had personally a student who's in Spanish who's a Chavacano speaker, most of my students do know the existence of Chavacano, or who might know somebody who speaks the language. And so my response is not about Chavacano per se, but about the let's say the Hispanic legacy in the Philippine languages, right? So I have been confronted in the Spanish language classroom by questions such as, why should we study a colonial language? Given our history, right? And here's where I talk about the research that we do, and how learning, not just us, but other other scholars, historians, as well as linguists, and even scholars of literature, and how knowledge of Spanish actually allows us to, as you pointed out, right, to come up with studies and to conduct research that ultimately addresses perhaps gaps in our historiography. You know, it allows us to, knowledge of Spanish actually allows us, to put it quite post-colonially, to write back. And that's what I tell my students. Like, when you learn what they call a colonial language, it can actually be a tool to decolonize. So when I say that my response is more personal, is when I tell my students, these are the kind of studies that you can pursue, you can conduct, and here is where knowledge of Spanish and other foreign languages may prove important.
Thank you for your answers, Miguel and Jillian. That's very, from what you said, it's something that we can also do as teachers of foreign languages. It's something, it's an answer that can be shared also to the students who ask the same questions in our classes. Thank you for that, Jillian. So let's proceed to, let me just read a comment here on the chat. It says, Bible from 𝐿𝐷𝐸𝐺 Bible in Chavacano version are being used in some churches in Zamboanga. Wow. Okay. And then let's continue with a question from an anonymous participant. In your opinion, is there a high possibility that Chavacano will be saved from extinction or being obsolete here in the Philippines?
Okay.
Well, before, when we talk about endangered languages, we should be aware of what's the meaning of that, because we should not look just to the number of speakers, because you can have a low number of speakers, but the language cannot be endangered at all if everything that is around is totally in place. Because, for example, you can have small communities. I'm thinking about, for example, Galician language in Spanish, for example, or that has a little community, maybe it's 1 million people surrounded by Spain, by a language that is spoken by 400 million people, like can be Spanish. But still, if you have many other things in place, that can be the use of the language in media, if this language is transmitted to the children. Finally, UNESCO had, I believe there are 10 different points to actually
evaluate
exactly. So because usually that's what we look at, no, the very moment that we see a language and we say, oh my God, there is just 500,000 people speaking Chavacano in the Philippines, no, in a 100 million country. Well, it depends of if this language is transmitted, of all the external forces that are surrounded there, immigration, urbanization, if there are competing languages like English and Filipino, but also internal. Do the families transmit the language to their kid? Is the language instructed in the schools? There are materials in place. There are advertisements on the street, and the media use it, the people use it in their conversations, because it's gathering data from all these different aspects, what actually tell us if a language is truly endangered or not. And as we have seen so far, is that Chavacano in the city of Zamboanga is not, but in other places like Cavite,
This is a very, this is a focal point in the study of Chavacano languages. And this is also why, as Marlon correctly pointed out earlier, most studies on Chavacano have dealt with historical genealogical concerns, because it's still not a given, right? It's still an ongoing debate whether or not, when we talk about Chavacano, are we talking about different Creoles, or are we talking about dialects of a single Creole? That's why there's an ongoing genealogical debate. Now, how is this related to the question of language endangerment? So, as my colleague pointed out, Zamboanga Chavacano is the healthiest variety to date, whilst empirical studies, as well as sociological studies, actually pointed out the endangerment of the Caviteño and Ternateño varieties. So we can only speak for the case of the Zamboanga Chavacano, knowing that there is a steady stream of initiatives, knowing that there is an institutional as well as ideological machinery behind the promotion and revitalization of this particular variety of Chavacano, then we can confidently say that Zamboanga Chavacano will, in the foreseeable future, will not be extinct or will be saved from endangerment. But the same cannot be said for the other varieties of Chavacano, and indeed for those that are already proved to be extinct. To give again another personal anecdote, right, as an answer to the question. So since publication of this article, we have been working closely with other scholars of Chavacano, international scholars such as, for example, Dr. Cipolla from the University of Helsinki in Finland. And she actually proposed to apply for an endangered language documentation program to try to document the previously undocumented varieties of Chavacano. That is Cotabateño, Davaoeño, and Caviteño. And the proposal actually was turned down by the academic commission. So it was not given funding on the basis of they did not see Chavacano on the whole as an endangered language. And we reckon that this is because of the strength of Zamboanga Chavacano. So even though there are varieties of Chavacano that are endangered and some are, even we might argue close to extinction because they have not yet been previously documented, not yet codified. Zamboanga Chavacano has such a strong presence that when there's limited resource, the evaluating committee said that given the limited resource, we would prioritize giving funding to languages that are actually in danger of extinction rather than varieties of a language that are endangered. So that's always the genealogical concern is always central to the let's say to the plight of the Chavacano varieties.
And actually what we wanted to, one of the main points of this paper, no, of this study, is also to shed light of how the Chabacano community, the Zamboangueño community, is proud of their own language and of their own ethnic ethnicity or identity, that they link so close to
Their
their
mother tongue.
language that is even encouraged by politicians, because it's a way also for them to stand out from the rest of the multicultural, multi-ethnicities and multi-ethnic Zamboanga, no? And by doing so, somehow they are preserving the language without maybe not even knowing so. Obviously, after that, there are other things in place, no? Like, oh, let's build a dictionary, let's do this.
It's their perception of their own language that actually plants the seed, right? Of revitalization. And we would like to actually highlight the singularity of this case, because as we said before, most of the world's Creoles are in fact losing more dominant languages, right? Especially in the wake of decolonization. So in other, in Haiti, for example, the French Haitian Creole, it has a lower social prestige, if we want to put it that way, because there the miscegenation is not seen as a source of pride compared to the pride that that has been ascribed to the Hispanidad of the Zamboangueño people. So it's like what we want to demonstrate here is how we cannot dissociate the issue of language preservation to that of ethnicity.
And that's why we believe this is important, because as we say, in preserving a language and knowing if a language is endangered, we should not just look at the number of speakers, but at many other variables that can be, for example, this pride, and all these initiatives,
The perception of
and the
speakers
perception
themselves.
exactly that was what we wanted to point out. Because, for example, Cantonese, that is spoken by almost 90 million of people compared to 500,000 of Zamboangueños, according to UNESCO, and most of people is going to disappear in a matter of decades. And it's because the present Mandarin society in China and the relation of Hong Kong with China, political relation and everything, somehow is going to make that a language that is talked by many is going to disappear. Meanwhile, in Zamboanga, you have a little community compared to that huge community of 500,000, but that have that pride and put in place all these initiatives that somehow allows Zamboangueño to
thrive.
To thrive, exactly. Not even being considered endangered, as Jillian has said.
Yes, thank you for that nuanced answer and the examples on the complexities in determining if a language is extinct or going extinct. We're actually already out of time for our question and answer, but we have 2 more questions here on the chat. Would it be possible to still answer them in a couple of minutes? Okay, thank you so much. So first, question from Camille Napalit. What was the most difficult aspect you've encountered in carrying out this study?
I don't know if I should answer, should I?
Go for it.
From my perspective, it's the theorizing, because as we said before, it's let's say that this aspect of Chavacano is relatively under-examined in the body of literature on the Chavacano Creoles. In the same vein, there have not been there have not been many studies, let's just put it that way, in the broad field of Creole studies addressing the quite evident post-coloniality of the languages, of the Creole languages themselves. So there are not many theories even that address these issues.
All right. Thank you, Jillian. So for our last question, Sir Joseph Solis Alcaide Abrisi is raising his hand. You also have a question on the chat. Do you think you can do both of your questions live? You will be our last questions.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
good. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. So my question, with regards to the 𝐏𝐵𝐾𝐻 and with the emergence of the Spanish language BPO industry in our country, do you think teaching standard Spanish in parallel with Zamboangueño Chabacano be doable in Zamboanga region? Do you think standard Spanish and Chabacano Zamboangueño can be taught in parallel or parallel? That's my question.
Go ahead.
Yes, as I said before, when I was trying to reply to Professor Sales' question, I truly believe, and as I said, how to deal with multilingual situation and how to teach languages in this kind of environment is more a way of how to approach how we teach the language rather than if we are capable of doing it or not, because actually we can see no, that even I'm surrounded by people that speak more than 2 languages, 3. There are people that speak even 4, you know what I mean? Because they have been taught since they were kids. And I believe that what we should do as teachers and people who believe how we study how languages should be taught, no, is take it, everything that can provide an advantage and use it in our own benefit. So for example, if I'm teaching Spanish in Zamboanga and I know that all of you have a huge lexicon that is very similar to Spanish, I have to try to use that on my own advantage when I'm teaching Spanish to you. And obviously, also, I have to be aware of the differences and how to avoid that the difference between the 2 languages are gonna somehow decrease the rate of how you learn Spanish. No, so as a professor, I really have to adapt myself and take everything that can be used in my advantage to teach you Spanish, and at the same time try to reduce that interference, no, between Chabacano and Spanish, and try to do so. But yeah, obviously, yes, for sure. I think you have a great advantage there if you want to learn Spanish, because 50% of your vocabulary somehow is related to Spanish. So if you are even thinking on that, just go for it.
Yeah, as Professor Sales pointed out in the chat, right? So as Professor Sales pointed out in the chat, and we very much agree, and I quote him, it's not a zero-sum game. So it's not a matter of choosing one language out of many, but rather teaching all the languages that can possibly be taught here. And we very much agree with that. So it's as my colleague said, it's learning to take advantage of everything, you know, everything that we have, in linguistic repertoire in the teaching of what we call standard varieties of the language.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blázquez and Ms. Melchor, for answering all our participants' questions. Thank you also to our participants who have provided the questions and that resulted in this very lively and enriching discussion. We are now closing the question and answer part of our Bahaginan Research Forum, and we would now like to thank our speakers, Dr. Blázquez and Ms. Melchor, by presenting them with this certificates of recognition. Let me just read the text. Certificate of recognition is awarded to Dr. Miguel Blázquez-Carretero and Ms. Jillian Louise Melchor for sharing their research titled The Postcoloniality of Creole Language Heritage, Preserving and Promoting 𝐶𝐤𝐴𝐺𝐻 Language at the 2023 𝐙𝐻𝐾𝐫 Bahaginan Research Forum. So this is signed by our Dean, Professor Jimwell Naval, and our Associate Dean for Research, Creative Work, and Publication, Assistant Professor Eileen Narvaez. Virtual applause for the both of you. Congratulations and thank you very much again. I will now call on our assistant, our associate dean for research, Assistant Professor Eileen Narvaez for our closing remarks.
Ayan, salamat Zara. Sa ngalan po ni Decano Jimwell Naval, nagpapasalamat po ang Kolehiyo ng Arte at Literatura. Una, sa dalawa nating tagapagsalita ngayon, salamat at pagbati Dr. Miguel Blázquez-Carretero and Miss Jillian Loise Melchor sa pagbabahagi ng napaka-interesanteng saliksik tungkol sa wikang Chavacano. Salamat din syempre sa Department of European Languages na namahala sa session ngayong hapon, lalo na kay Assistant Professor Zara Daintan na naging coordinator/moderator din ngayon sa hapon na ito. At kay Associate Professor 𝐿𝐴𝐺𝐸𝐵 Sarmiento na nagbigay ng mensahe kanina at nakinig hanggang matapos tayo ngayon. Higit na pasasalamat syempre sa taguyod ng UP Diliman Office for Initiatives in Culture and the Arts o OICA na walang sawang sumusuporta sa mga gawain ng UP CAL. Ang CAL Bahaginan po ay sinasagawa ng Kolehiyo ng Arte at Literatura kada semestre. So iniimbitahan namin kayong mag-abang sa mga susunod na CAL Bahaginan sa susunod na SEM at hopefully ay in-person forum na tayo sa susunod at may mga kasama ng merienda at kape. Diba? Yun yung na-miss natin sa mga forum na ito na Zoom tayo. So maraming salamat sa mga kasama namin ngayon sa Zoom, sa FB at YouTube Live. Inaanyayahan ko rin po kayo na magbahagi ng inyong saliksik sa mga susunod na kalbahaginan. Sana muli, di ba? Tayo ay muli magkita-kita at in-person na, face-to-face. Salamat muli at kita-kita tayo uli sa susunod. Ayan. Salamat uli, Zara.
Thank you, Ma'am Ai. Ayan. So, as promised, ayan. Ito po ang ating evaluation form. Importante po ito, lalo sa mga estudyante na nag-attend ngayon. Nahihintay itong evaluation form. Nailagay rin po ang link sa ating chat. Please, you can just click on it or you can scan this QR code to access our evaluation form. So that all things must come to an end, unfortunately. So this is the end of our CAL Bahaginan Research Forum. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Blázquez and Ms. Melchor, for sharing your research on this forum. Sa ulitin, I hope hindi kayo magsawang suportahan ng ating research forum. Also, thank you again to our participants. Please like our Facebook page and also our YouTube channel para ma-update po kayo when we have our next Bahaginan Research Forum slated already. So once again, thank you so much and may all of you have a very good afternoon. Bye!
Maraming salamat.